All right, so this week we're covering cases that deal with Title IX. The case that I picked to research was entitled Kelley versus Board of Trustees, and this case takes place at the University of Illinois. Back in 1993, the University of Illinois was facing a large budget deficit of about $600,000 in their athletic department and decided that they needed to cut some teams in order to help with their budget deficit. In order to do that, they basically determined that they were only going to retain teams in their athletic department that were able to compete for Big Ten conference championships and NCAA championships. In order to make that determination, they set up a bunch of criteria of how they were going to analyze the programs and decide if they were going to keep them. Among those, they kind of just decided that they were going to focus on factors such as tradition of success in the sport, level of interest in the sport at the high school level, because that would tell them how many kids were going to be coming up into college, the level of interest from spectators, because that would, determine how much revenue they were bringing in from it, any gender and ethnic issues, and the cost of the operating budget for the sport. So, using all of those criteria, the athletic director evaluated all 19 programs and determined that they were going to cut men's swimming, men's fencing, and men's and women's diving. Now, along with those issues from the budget, they also had big issues with Title IX compliance. So, all the way back in 1982, the Office of Civil Rights had determined that the University of Illinois had been denying its female population athletic opportunities. They had a severe deficit as to the percentage of girls that went to the school and the percentage of sports that were offered to them. So they were having a proportionality issue. But by law, the government allowed them adequate amount of time to make up that difference. But by 1993, there was still a major proportionality issue. So there was 44% of the school was female, and only 23% of their athletic population was female. So they also needed to make these cuts in order to fall into compliance with Title IX. So men's swimming becomes the plaintiff in this case. They're the ones who are going to bring the lawsuit against the university. Now, they were cut because they were a historically bad team, did not have a very strong tradition. So that's why they were cut. Now, the reason that they're bringing the case is because the men's team was cut, but the women's swimming team was not cut. So the plaintiffs in this case allege that the university's decision to cut the men's swimming program had violated Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The University of Illinois just basically moved to have the case dismissed immediately, stating that they were in compliance with Title IX with their actions. So they don't really have much of a rebuttal to what the team is saying. Both parties agreed for a summary judgment, basically skipping the entire process of the trial, and the district court ruled in favor of the university and denied the plaintiffs preliminary injunction to allow that next season of 1993 to continue. So the plaintiffs then appealed this case on the basis of Section 106.41 of Title IX. It kind of lays out the determining factors whether or not a school is in compliance with Title IX. So one of those determining factors is whether or not the selection of sports at the university effectively accommodates the interests of both sexes, which they were not because the population was so disproportionate to the amount of opportunities offered to the females. So the plaintiffs were arguing that this statute actually perverted Title IX and transformed it from a statute that prohibits discrimination into a statute that actually mandated discrimination against male teams due to the fact that male teams had to be cut in order to create proportionality with the women's teams, whether it was for budget reasons or not. So the appeals court ruled in favor of the University of Illinois also. The court basically stated that allowing a school to consider gender when determining which athletic programs to cut ensured that when there were situations where the overall number of teams were going to decrease, which in this case it did, because they cut 3 men's team and 1 women's team, the women's diving team, their goal with this was to ensure that the actual number of teams available to the underrepresented gender did not decrease. And so, while it did, it was still helping them become proportionate. And because it was helping them become proportionate, it was an attempt to protect the interest of the disproportionately represented gender, females in this case, by preserving the women's swim team while cutting the men's team. So their action was found to be constitutional on that basis. So therefore, the appeals court upheld the decision of the district court, stating that the University of Illinois' decision to cut the men's team did not violate Title IX or the Equal Protection Clause. So at the end of the day, the men's swimming team is basically, overruled in this case. Their argument was irrelevant because Section 106.41 was created in order to ensure that universities could consider gender when determining what sports to cut. So nothing that they did was unconstitutional there. I think the big takeaway that I got from this case is that your athletic department has to consider conforming with Title IX prior to creating more opportunities for one gender or another. At Green Valley, whenever they've added a sport, they've added a men's and a women's team in order to be in compliance with Title IX. Just recently, I'm a wrestling coach, so just recently we felt this impact. They added women's wrestling as an official MSHA sport in this past season. Now, before that, women were always able to wrestle on the men's team, so that opportunity was co-ed in the past. And so they did have the opportunity to compete on the team, participate on the team. They just had to participate against males. So now that they've added that, I think it kind of levels the playing field for them. But due to the fact that it was a co-ed opportunity in the past, we were still in compliance. But I think that that's the big thing. The big takeaway from this case is, whenever you're adding sports, you need to make sure that you are offering a proportionate amount of opportunities to both sexes. And one of the ways that we've done that is by surveying our student body and our upcoming student body, so middle schoolers, on their level of interest in these sports that we're considering offering. And if there's not a high level of interest, there was a good chance that we weren't even going to um, start the sport or offer the opportunity for them. So, but I think that's one of the biggest things that can be done in order to make sure that you're offering ample amount of opportunities. We did that when we offered a dance team recently for the girls. We surveyed the school and found out the level of interest, and there was a need for it. But again, that's another co-ed situation. Same thing with cheerleading, and so I think it's a little bit easier to fall in compliance with Title IX in the high school level because so many of your opportunities can be co-ed, whereas at the collegiate level, NCAA, you can't really compete co-ed in those situations.